guests. We ask for patience during this virtual meeting. Multiple staff members are behind the scenes to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly and all applicants and citizens are able to communicate with the commission at the appropriate times. During the meeting, you will see live images or still images of DDRC members and staff. However, images of the applicant and public will not be visible.
The public will also be able to participate via 3 methods. When participating, please provide your name for documentation purposes. The public may watch, may email, may phone, or may log into the web session. If you're watching, you may stream the meetings through City TV, which may be accessed at www.youtube.com/user/Columbia-SC-Government. If you're emailing, you may submit letters and statements to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov leading up to and or during the meeting, as this account will be monitored during the meeting. Emails and letters will be read into the record. If you're phoning, you may call 855-925-2801. When prompted, please enter the meeting code 5138. So if you're participating by phone, you have 3 options. If you hit *1, this allows you to listen. If you hit *2, you can record a voicemail message that will be read into the record. *3 will allow a participant to be placed in a queue so they may speak live when prompted. Please make sure your computer audio is muted if calling in live via your phone. And if you wish to stream, you can join the virtual meeting on the web at publicinput.com/COC-DDRC-November.
Could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Baker? Okay. Mr. Broom?
Here.
Mr. Dinkins?
Present.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Here.
Ms. Jaco?
Here.
Ms. Johnson? I think Ms. Johnson might be joining us a little later. Mr. Salibi?
Present.
Mr. Savory?
Here.
And Mr. Wolf?
Here.
We have quorum.
Very good. In order to avoid ex parte communications, DDRC members are under strict instructions not to discuss cases under consideration with the public or with each other outside of the public forum. The meeting typically starts with staff calling the case, giving a summary of the project, and then calling on the applicant to present if they wish. Decisions are typically made in one evening. Decisions may be appealed within 30 days to a court of competent jurisdiction. Oaths will be administered individually as we hear either from applicants or from live speakers. Applicants with requests before the DDRC are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as an attorney, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by the DDRC or staff regarding requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. Applicants may have 5 minutes to respond. Staff has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. Are there any changes to the agenda?
We've had a few changes since publication. Under the consent agenda, 41 to 4105 Monticello Road, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the North Main Corridor Overlay District has been moved to the regular agenda. And then under the historic agenda, 1644 Main Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for signage and appeal to a staff decision for an individual landmark Baileyville structure has been deferred. And likewise, item number 6, a vacant lot adjacent to 2219 Rembert Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction and site improvements in the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District has also been deferred.
Thank you. The DDRC uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will staff please read the consent agenda?
Certainly. So the consent agenda as it stands starts with 1215 Shop Road, a request for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill. This is a National Register structure. 819 Maple Street is a request for design approval for an accessory building in the Old Shandon Lower Waverly Protection Area, Area A. 2726 Preston Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Old Shandon Lower Waverly Protection Area, Area A. 109 South Parker Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Olympia Mill Village National Register Historic District. 1219 Assembly Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill. This is the National Register structure in the City Center Design Development District. 1214 to 1216 Taylor Street, request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill. This is in the Columbia Commercial National Register Historic District. And 1218 Taylor Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill in the Columbia Commercial National Register Historic District.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the DDRC that would like any item removed from the consent agenda?
Yes, Chair, I would like to move to remove item 1 from the consent agenda, the regular agenda.
Item 1 being the Shop Road project?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anything else from anybody? Okay. Please communicate by, this is for the general public, of course. Please communicate by sending an email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov. Please communicate via phone by pressing *2 to leave a voicemail, or *3 to speak in person, and we will pause to allow communication from the public.
Hello, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I do have 2 callers that have raised their hands to speak. I imagine they are here for an item or one of the items that's on the regular agenda. However, I do not have a way of confirming that. So I will patch through the first caller now.
Thank you.
I may like to take this opportunity to let those on the line know that it is best if you do raise your hand when the item that you wish to speak on is called.
There's somebody that's about to speak.
It sounds like they may have left the phone. So I will end that speaking session and I will patch through the next caller.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. This is Kathleen McDaniel and Lyman Munson. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. We are on standby to speak regarding the project 4101, 4105 Monticello Road.
Mhm.
We're
You'll have
happy
an
to
opportunity.
stand by to,
Yes, that's been taken off the
We're happy-
consent, agenda, and you'll have an opportunity when we
Yeah.
get to that project.
yes. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. I will end this speaking session, and when that item is called, do press *3 to raise your hand at that point.
You have no idea what's going on. It'd be so much better for
If you could mute your phone, please.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, are you making a motion to remove the Shop Road item number 1 from the consent agenda?
Okay.
This room?
Can't we just do that in the motion itself?
I'd like
I need a motion and a second to remove that item first. Was that motion made?
I believe I did make
I
that
mean,
motion,
I'll-
so I think now it just needs a
Yeah.
second.
Okay, second, please.
second.
I'll second that, along with the removal of item number 8 as well.
That's already been,
4101. Okay.
item 8 has been removed. So we have a motion to remove item 1 from the consent agenda and also to accept the October minutes. We have a vote, please.
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes,
and Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
That motion passes.
thank you. First item, please.
Okay, the first item now on the regular agenda is going to be the item that was just removed from the consent agenda. It's 4101 to 4105 Monticello Road. This is a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the North Main Corridor District. This project was determined to largely meet the design guidelines by staff, which is why it was put on the consent agenda. So the recommendation is for approval. I think the architect is here to maybe make a presentation or certainly answer any questions. Craig Otto, did you want to present the case or just?
No, I don't think I really have anything to add to it, Lucinda, since it was already on the consent agenda. I think we just probably need to hear from the public to see what the objections are.
All right. If we come back to you, I will sway you at that point.
Thank you.
Is there anybody in the public who wishes to speak on this application?
I will patch the caller through.
Okay.
Good afternoon. This is Kathleen McDaniel. I'm here with
Excuse
my
me,
client,
ma'am.
Lyman
Excuse me.
Munson.
Excuse me, Ms. McDaniel, I need to swear you in. Do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Oh, well, yes,
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
I do. Okay. I'm an attorney here in Columbia, representing Lyman Munson and the Hyatt Park Ken Terrace neighborhood in regard to this application. We're asking today for you to defer consideration of this application to give the neighborhood time to talk with the owner and the manager of the proposed project about the neighborhood's concerns for the project. The biggest concern is the sale of alcohol at this location, which we can see is planned because of the incorporation of a beer cave into the design and signage on the outside advertising the beer cave. This location has a fraught history regarding the sale of alcohol. The currently existing convenience store there, the A1 food store, was a very high crime area prior to 2015 when they were selling beer and wine. Evidence showed that there were more than 300 calls for service per year in 2012, 13, and 14. When that alcohol license came up for renewal, the Hyatt Park Ken Terrace neighborhood protested it, and a decision from the administrative law court determined that alcohol could not be sold at this location because the location is not suitable for the sale of alcohol. That decision was affirmed by the Court of Appeals in July 12, 2017. We know that alcohol sales at this location have a negative impact on the neighborhood, and when those sales end, the neighborhood, the negative impact cease. For example, in 2013, there were 335 calls for service and 53 reported crimes. Alcohol sales ended in 2015. Thereafter, in 2017, calls for service went down to only 83, and there were only 2 reported crimes for the entire year. The neighborhood is really concerned that if alcohol sales resume at this location, that the crime previously associated with the sale of alcohol will return to this location. The owner and the manager of the project are well aware of the prohibition of the sale of alcohol at this location and the neighborhood's serious concerns. Nevertheless, no one from this project contacted the neighborhood until yesterday at 3 p.m. when Saluda Apartments, the owner of the business, emailed Ty Ziegler, who's the Hyatt Park Ken Terrace neighborhood, to ask to set up a meeting. We asked Mr. Ziegler asked Mr. Palmer to defer today's hearing so that we could actually have that meeting. He didn't receive any response to the email, and so Mr. Palmer called me today, and I explained to him the neighborhood's concerns and asked him again if he'd be willing to defer the hearing until we could talk with him and the neighborhood and his manager, Mr. Ricky Catani. It's my understanding that they talked to Mr. Otto, the architect, and because he's going on vacation next month, they didn't want to defer and are wanting to move forward today. I explained to Mr. Palmer that that's really unfortunate because it really would have been a show of good faith to the neighborhood if they'd been willing to talk to the neighborhood before proceeding to seek any approvals, including approvals from this commission. We understand that your duty is to evaluate site design. However, your role is larger than that. It's also pursuant to section 17-653, your duty as members of the Design Development Review Commission to advise, assist, and present the best interest of the city, represent the best interest of the city, and matters relating to coordination of and assistance to other bodies and private interests and activities related to design protection areas.
We're past 3
It's
minutes.
currently not in the best of the interest of the neighborhood to approve a design that specifically includes the currently prohibited sale of alcohol at this location. For example, state law, and I know we're not talking about liquor sales here, but state law prohibits the establishment of a liquor store within 300 feet of a school. Knowing that, would the DRC approve the site design for even a really beautiful liquor store next door to Eau Claire High School? I would hope not. We asked today that the DRC defer consideration of this application until the applicant and the neighbors have had a meaningful opportunity to discuss the neighborhood's concerns and see if there are design elements that might be incorporated that would address the concerns about alcohol at this location. In the alternative, we asked the DRC to deny this application. And that concludes my remarks. I have Lyman Munson on the phone with me now. And if it's okay with you all, I'll just pass the phone to him to give him a chance as a neighbor who lives very close to the proposed project, his concerns. Is that okay?
That's fine. And if he would please state his name, and I'll swear him in as well.
Okay, this is Lyman Munson, a neighbor at 4015 Lamar Street, corner of Duke.
He's got to swear you in. Let him swear you in. Let him swear you in.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Munson. And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed, please.
Okay, excuse me. Lyman Munson, 4015 Lamar Street, corner of Duke. I look at the A1 property every day. I also look across the street at Walter's Retirement Home and at-risk adult facility with 38 people who certainly barricade signage would be a beacon for those people. And I think the DDRC is sort of first in line here this time with this applicant who we've met several times. And we think that they ought to wait. They ought to defer and go through the other processes that they have to go through before they would normally get to you. So we would ask that you defer, and if not, just deny. I haven't, since 2018, I haven't really met anybody from there. And like I say, I heard about it yesterday. Really sort of sneaking up on us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess at this point, I could ask the applicant, it's your choice. You can either speak to to these comments, or you can wait to see if there are other comments. I would say first that, and other members can join in, but while it this seems like a very serious concern, the sale of alcohol in this location, it is correct that it's outside of the purview of the DDRC. We don't make decisions based on use. It's just exterior aesthetics and site approval. I think my understanding is that this is still up for zoning board.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, there is an application in for them to get the special exception that's required in order to sell alcohol, and that will, I believe they're on the December agenda, if I'm not mistaken, for the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay, so this is also information for the rest of the commissioners. I might encourage somebody else to speak up after we've heard from the applicant, and if there are any other members of the public that wish to speak, the applicant has the right to respond to them as well. But I think we have one of two choices. We either we can defer this, or we can address the application strictly from our purview now and get that behind us, knowing that there's more that they have to do with the zoning board. So, but first, Craig, what would you prefer to do? To wait to see if there are other comments, or would you like to respond to what we've heard so far?
Well, I would like to respond eventually, but if you think it would be wise to go ahead and see if there are any more public comments first, I'll be glad to wait.
Well, just that by virtue of this whole virtual thing, sometimes it's easier to do that. It's up to you.
I would like to respond, but whenever you invite me to, I'll be happy to.
Okay, let me ask if there are is there anybody else waiting to speak, or any other email or other responses from the public so far?
We have no emails regarding this project right now.
And nobody else is on the line?
I do not see anyone else on the line, nor any comments that have been logged in.
Okay, so Mr. Otto, please respond.
Thank you. I do appreciate the comments from the neighbors and their attorney. Certainly they have valid concerns. It's my understanding that the owner did meet with them at some time in the past. I can't tell you when that was or exactly what was discussed, but the owner felt confident that the project would be a go eventually. The reason that there is signage on the renderings is just to fill in some space and to sort of provide full disclosure, but the signage has to be approved on a separate basis, as far as I understand, separate from the design of the building. So that signage isn't necessarily going to be there, and they might not necessarily put that signage on there. That's certainly something that can be discussed in the future. But as Lucinda pointed out, the owner has made application for a special exception, which I believe will be heard in December. And certainly that is the place at which the neighbors would want to meet and express their concern. And it's my understanding that the DRC, as you stated earlier, that's not their purview. So we would like to go ahead and proceed and hopefully receive design approval today. But then we understand that these concerns will be expressed again next month in December when we have the special exception zoning meeting. I think the staff has been pleased with the design, and I've made the changes that they've asked me to make. So regardless of whether or not it ends up having alcohol sales, beer or wine sales on the inside, I think I'm just looking for approval for the exterior design and not including signage, just the building itself.
Understood. So I think that the result is going to be the same, whether we approve the design tonight or we were to wait until after it goes before the zoning board. If it's approved and were to come back, it would be probably the same result. Or if we approve it tonight and the variance isn't granted, that's the order of it doesn't really matter much. I'd like to open it up to other members now to decide whether we move forward with the decision about a design approval, or whether we think there's merit in delaying it.
I personally don't see any reason why we would wait. I think that's a separate zoning issue and business license.
Okay, very good. Any other thoughts, other comments from other commissioners? I take that as a no. Would somebody like to make a motion? Mr. Dickens, perhaps?
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Andrew Livingood. The previous caller has raised their hand again, if you should choose to recognize them.
Okay, sure.
Here you go.
Thank you. This is Lyman Munson, and since you are going to entertain a motion and vote on this, the neighbors would like to make several points about the existing building. And the building is really very plain Jane. It's a color of brick that's not in keeping with adjoining buildings. I think everybody knows that the Survey Print building is diagonally across Monticello Road from this facility. And that's a building with heavy fenestrations and, period orange brick. Adjoining that, of course, is the Eau Claire Town Hall and the tower there. And the brick and fenestration is not ornate, but certainly detailed. And I would say that if you're going to move forward with this building as a building, the applicant should replicate that sort of design criteria that's from two adjoining historic properties. I would say that the brick color shouldn't be black. It should be in keeping with other brick structures in the area. And as far as the site plan, if we're working on a site plan, if the applicant is going to have food service, they need to have a place to eat outside. Given coronavirus, outdoor seating certainly should be considered. So I think if we're just going to approve this the way it is, it's inconsistent with the North Main corridor guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess then before we move on for further discussion from the commissioners, Mr. Otto, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I do understand his comments and concerns with what's existing. However, we are quite a little ways down the road from the historic structures there at the corner of Main and Monticello. And there's really nothing adjoining this property that would give any sort of architectural character or give us some sort of guidelines as to how we should design the exterior. We were shooting for a bit of a more modern look rather than going back in time to try to replicate existing architecture. And it's very similar in design to a project that is at the corner of North Main and Confederate, which is not obviously next to this site, but it's near, it's in the North Main corridor. And we were just sort of going for that kind of look. So that's the direction we were headed rather than trying to give it the look of a historic structure.
Thank you. We did not go through the design. We talked more about the members of the public's concerns about alcohol sales. So I guess at this point, I should ask if commissioners want to go back through and review the design, or do we want to move forward?
Tom, I apologize for interrupting. May I just, I forgot to make one point. The caller mentioned having outdoor seating, and my owner had mentioned to me that they did have that discussion some time ago, and they originally started to put some outdoor seating on the Duke Avenue side, but that the neighborhood, I'm just telling you what I was told, that the neighborhood at that time was not real keen on outdoor seating because they didn't want to have loitering and a lot of folks just standing there at the corner or hanging out at the corner outside the building. So that's why we deleted outdoor seating area to keep the loitering down. Okay,
thank you. We certainly can't force you to do outdoor seating. That's part of this. So at this time, I would like to ask other commissioners if you would like to go back and have a review of the design. I don't know what motion Mr. Dinkins was about to make, but I can probably guess. Is there anybody who would like to review the design before a motion is made, since we really haven't done that?
I think from the site design, I mean, I've looked at that, and I think it's, in keeping with what is in our purview.
And we're also, of course, talking about the building, not just the site. So I'm going to ask if other commissioners would like to get a presentation on the building and the site before we move to a vote. I think we've all looked at the package and we've looked at the staff recommendations, and so that's the only real question in my mind remaining before somebody makes a motion.
My
yeah.
answer is no.
Pardon? Could we have a motion?
Sure. I move to grant a certificate of design approval for new construction at 4101-4105 Monticello Road due to the proposed design substantially meeting the design guidelines for the North Main corridor. And that's it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Could we have a vote, please?
Sure. Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next case, please.
Okay, the next case on the regular agenda is 1025 to 1043 UG Street. This is a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in the Innovista Design District. This is a case that you guys saw in September of this year. and had some concerns raised, and we had a discussion at that hearing. And the applicant has conveniently, who is Craig Otto, still here, has made a number of changes based on those recommendations from the last hearing, and is here to discuss the revisions to the design. And the staff approval is, or excuse me, the staff recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. The applicant wish to speak?
Yes, and I'll be brief. We made.
And I swear you in at this point. I should have before. Probably tell the truth in these proceedings.
I do, and I do for the previous project as well. We've made quite a few changes based on staff and committee recommendations. There is substantially more brickwork on the UG Street and Senate Street sides of the building. Rather than the recessed areas being brick, the projected areas are brick and the recessed areas are cement board panels. The brick has pilasters on both sides of each projection going down to the ground. The brick does go all the way to the top. The former sloped shingled roof has been completely deleted. We've gone to a flat roof with parapet walls. The sloped shed roofs are still present on the UG Street end of the building. However, we have deleted them from the other end of the building towards the river. Didn't feel like they were of any value to us there. The body of those corners are clad in horizontal metal siding, upgraded metal siding, in a sort of a light gray or silver color. You can see the color of the brick. We probably will make sure when we get a little further down the road that we select the right brick and have Lucinda look at that for hopefully for staff approval. We do anticipate painting the cement board panels and the soffits the dark charcoal color. We have substantially more glass facing UG Street. We've now deleted all of the guest rooms from that wing on the ground floor. That'll all be public space in order to have more presence on the street. On the flip side, on the back side, not facing the street, we have actually reduced brick and have more cement board panel on the back side. But the drawing that Lucinda has up now, the right hand end of that bottom picture, as you can see, is you'll see that end fairly substantially when you're driving up UG Street away from the fairgrounds. So that still has brick and metal siding and the shed roofs. But I appreciate Lucinda's input and the commission's as well, because it's the building is substantially improved. I don't think I have anything else to add to that. So if you'd like to ask any questions or make any comments, you're welcome to.
Craig, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On this elevation, you're showing little windows each side of the storefront. What are those?
Right there near the corner.
Yeah.
Those are actually not small windows. Those are louvered grills for the VTAC, or the air conditioning system that will be located next to that window. Rather than a typical through-wall motel type unit, these are vertical units that sit inside the room, and they do need outside air. Now, most of these, and I failed to show them in some cases, but most of these will be in the recessed areas on the sides of the wall. So they won't be terribly visible, and we'll paint them the same color as the brick. But in that front tower, there was really nowhere else to put them, so they had to be right there. And then if you look down to the left a little further, you'll see them right between those windows. Those are the only locations that I'm aware of facing either UG or Senate that the louvers are facing the street. The rest of the locations down Senate Street and some on UG will be on the sides of the brick walls. So those are louvered grills.
Any other, excuse me, any other questions for the applicant from commissioners? This is vastly improved. You know, it's a simple design. To me, it's almost a case study in how a project can be improved through applicant, staff, and commission cooperation, and just in terms of the very basic changes that have been made to the material palette and the choices, locations of brick and cement board, and the organization of the facade. So I think it's vastly improved from the last time it came before us.
Thank you.
Hearing no other, I'm going to wait just a second. Hearing no other questions for the applicant, I think in that case we will move to public comments. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiac.gov or on the web at publicinput.com, COCDDRC-November. For those wanting to leave a voice message or speak live, call 855-925-2801 when prompted, and the meeting code 5138, and press 2 to begin leaving a message. Or if you'd like to speak, press *3. And please be sure your computer audio is off. We'll now hear comments that have been received in writing, if there are any.
We do not have any emails regarding this project.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And voicemails or anybody calling live?
I do not have any voicemails, and I do not see any callers that have indicated they want to speak.
Very good, thank you. Okay. All right. With that, if there are no more questions for the applicant, no more discussion, would a commissioner care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion and then we'll comment. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Sanford.
All right. I'll make a motion to grant a certificate of design approval for new construction located at 1025 through 1043 UG Street based upon the design generally in keeping with the Innovista Design District guidelines, with the condition that the minimum window depth of 4 inches be maintained for the brick encased windows, and all other details be deferred to staff.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We have a vote, please.
Certainly, Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes.
and Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tom, and to all the commission members. Thank you for your service to the city and to the community.
Thank you. Next case, please.
Okay, the next case is 1401 to 1431 Assembly Street, as well as 1011 to 1019 Washington Street. This is actually a request for certificate of design approval to some changes that were made to a design that this commission approved in March of this year in the City Center Design Development District. And I'm just going to go ahead. I think the applicant is here to screen share, and we're going to hear from Jay Case first, and then Andrew Savoy with the development team. And I'm going to go ahead and unshare so they can share their screen. Are you guys ready?
Yes. Lucinda, did you want to give your report, or did you want us to go first?
I'll just let y'all go ahead and make your presentation. I think y'all got a pretty thorough illustration of what the changes are.
Yeah, well, this is Jay Case, and I'm a partner with CRG, the developer. And what I thought we would do is I wanted to give you a little history, tell you a little bit about why we're here in front of you today, and then turn it over to Andy, my colleague, to walk you through the design. there's some history here, and I think, as you know, we've presented a couple of times to DDRC and had numerous conversations with Lucinda in planning about this project. The big thrust of the change that we made leading to the March approval was to increase the parking and change the composition of the development a little bit. And we've, now up to something around 405 parking spaces in the building. And getting the parking to work is something that is a big factor in driving some of these design changes. It's important that it work, it's important that it be efficient, and it's important that it be cost effective. Today in this COVID environment, and not just the environment of the disease, but the economy that it has dragged down along with it, everything is under a much higher scrutiny. This project was on a much quicker track in March than it is today, mostly because capital partners in particular, but quite frankly us as well, needed to see how University of South Carolina was going to respond, and universities generally. That response has been pretty good. I do think we're going to brace for some additional COVID impact here in the Thanksgiving season, but the world seems to be coming back. The economy seems to be breathing some new sighs of relief. And so now there's some more forward momentum to get that done. That said, the goal here had always been to deliver for 2023 school year, and the window on accomplishing that is getting smaller and smaller, so that some of the design changes that we have represent in this presentation were designed to increase the speed of delivery. And in particular, that has to do a lot with what we did above the ground podium, if you will. So those changes were designed to make this building faster to build, and that's definitely a factor in some of the design changes. And then on a related note, everything is under high scrutiny, as we talked about, including cost, and some changes have been made to address some cost concerns raised by capital partners. All that said, we think we've done a really nice job. This building follows the original pattern of design. We've added some elements that I think are exciting. We've added a corner of glass at the north. Get the directions goofed up, but I think it's the northeast corner of the building that wasn't there before. And then the last thing is, not to put words in Lucinda's mouth, but having read the report, I think she has a favorable review, and I think she has some comments that we are more than willing to address. She's suggesting some art mural in the front of the building, which we were happy to do and want to work with her on that. She's also suggested that we add some glass in the elevator tower along Assembly. We think we can also do that. This project is an interesting piece as it fits into the puzzle between us and the library. We've done a lot of work to enhance that library walkway, and that project is going to be part of this, and will also include some mural and artwork as it transitions between those two buildings from Assembly Street to that parking lot behind the library. So with that said, I'm hopeful that you'll give us a favorable review so we can keep on track. And Andy is going to walk you through some of the facade elements, but we'd like to leave as much time as you guys want for questions. So we're not going to try to address every detail, but we're certainly available. And we've got the architect on the phone as well if you have those kinds of questions.
If I could really fast just jump in here. Tom, I think we need to swear in both of the speakers. And then that's okay. And I just wanted to remind also that we're trying to keep the presentation to 10 minutes. So let's try that for the next bit.
Okay, Jay.
We've got a timer. Thank you.
Jay, has your testimony been, have you told the truth in your testimony?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Andy, if you could state your name and also promise to tell the truth in these proceedings.
Andy Savoy, and yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Lucinda.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and run through this presentation. The site is still where it was at the location of Assembly and Washington Street on the northwest corner of that intersection. We're about 4 blocks north of the university, and we're just south of the Richland County Library building. Here you can see our current site plan, and I think if you can see my cursor, The biggest difference here is that where we were, the U shape is the taller portion of our building, and we were all the way up to the property line in the previous proposal. Now we're proposing to set back about 21 feet from the Washington Street right-of-way to allow for a lower section of the building here. And we've done that really to accommodate a new parking layout that we have that's much more efficient. And so this allows for there to be a projection of the building on the ground floor along Washington Street that's really more friendly to the pedestrian scale. This is how the lower level would lay out. The curb cuts in the exact same place where it was approved before. The trash is handled and picked up from the exact same place where it was approved before. The big difference here is that we had 2 bays of parking with a speed ramp in the middle initially, and now we're proposing parking that's continuously ramped. So no speed ramp is needed. So that's reduced the width of the building. It's allowed us to set back off of Washington Street. On the ground floor here, you can see that you have your lobby and amenities and leasing offices in this lower part of the building. And then that turns into a brick colonnade that hides some of the mechanical components below. But it maintains a nice pedestrian scale along Washington Street that you're going to see better in renderings later on. This is just a standard parking floor. As you can see, this is our floor plate. So because we were setting back a little more than we were before, the unit count has changed slightly, but the bed count is the exact same as was approved initially. And you'll see we had to make some adjustments to the windows to kind of realign them with the new unit layout. And so because of this, the amenity deck has gotten slightly smaller. And because we're losing the square footage that was formerly taken up by these 2 legs of the building, we've actually added another floor to the building, but we've been able to finagle the floor-to-floor heights so that the building height is actually the same as was previously approved. So this is the current elevation, Washington Street elevation. And so, as you can see, really the biggest change is this bustle that acts as an entry feature to the building. And that's programmed as amenity and office to about the center point here. And then this is when it transitions into that brick colonnade. The base of the building up to the amenity level is brick. And then that transfers into a stucco product above that for the residential levels. We've kept the vertical look by color and texture changes along the window line. So that's very similar to what was previously approved. And our previous floor-to-floor height was 10 feet. Now we've changed that to 9'4". That's allowed us to fit another floor on top of this, make up for the square footage that we lost, and still be at the same building height. And actually, I think our gross square footage is actually less now than what was previously approved. This is the Assembly Street elevation. As you can see, it's pretty similar to what was previously approved. And just so you know, at the end of this presentation, I have an appendix that actually compares the previous approval to this, in case anyone wants to see it. This is the north elevation that would be up against the Richland County Library. Some sections through the courtyard here. And here's the fun part. So this is the new rendering looking from the corner of Washington Assembly. So you have this bustle here that is now the entry to the building, and then it kind of transfers into this brick colonnade along here. So that's a nice 2 to 3 story scale along the property line that kind of breaks up, that provides, some relief from this 17-story building behind it. We're keeping the glass corner components. We've actually also added glass corner windows here and also back here, which you'll see in some of the other renderings. This is the view from across the street, kind of mid-block. You can see our parking entrance here. This is the view right up against the entry of the building. These are the glass corner windows that I mentioned earlier that weren't previously there. We have perforated metal screen here, very similar to what was approved the first time, because I believe there was concern about being able to see the mechanical transfers in the parking deck from Assembly Street. So we're keeping that as initially approved. We have the pedestrian scale canopies here. It was a similar concern from the earlier DDRC presentations. This is the entrance, the new entrance that we'll be constructing to the lower level of the Richland County Library is down this pathway here. So this is the north side of our building. And then this is just looking up Washington towards Assembly. This is what that would look like in context. So with that, you know, Jay, I don't know if you have any closing comments, but that's all I have to say. I know Lucinda had a few things she wanted to work with us on, and we're very happy to do that. So Jay, unless you have anything else, I believe that's it for me.
No, I really don't have anything to add, except that I will tell you it has been a collaborative effort all along the way, and we appreciate that, and we continue to be open to that. So with that, I turn it over to you guys for any questions or comments.
I just have an initial question. I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit confused because I think this is the fourth design that you guys have brought to us, and two have been approved. So did the parking not work in the previously approved project? Because I see a lot of differences with this project that we can get into in a moment, but I'm just trying to understand. You mentioned schedule impact, but construction has continued on since March. I know I'm several projects under construction myself, but it sounds, I don't understand why you have gone through this fairly significant redesign.
Andy, do you have the previous parking plan? Do you have
You just did it not work?
So this is the way it initially worked out.
And I would just say that, just go back to that drawing for a minute.
Well, and we don't need to get into tremendous detail about that. I'm just trying to understand why the project has come back with very significant changes that we never, there was never any comment about concern about setting back along Washington Street, for instance.
I mean, I think that the answer is that it's an evolving process. I mean, that's just being candid with you. When we engage the contractors, to really gear up to do this, there was a lot of question about why would we design the parking ramping system in this fashion that would cost us a lot more to do it. And we didn't get anything back by doing it. We have the same number of parking spaces either way. And so, as I said earlier, cost considerations are a factor here. So we had to be, efficient in that parking. So could we have done better the first time? Probably, but that's really what drove it. I mean, it's truly that simple.
Any other questions before we move on for the applicants?
I have a question about the doors into the trash room off Washington Street. Is that shown on the elevation?
Andy?
Let's see. It should be, but I don't want to say that if it's not. So let's just see. So that door would be there, actually.
There are doors, yeah.
On the previous elevations, it was shown. That's the previous design. Here, it would be, it would be right here in this opening. It's not on that drawing.
And another thing is, from my experience, the generator room, you have a generator on that parking level. You got one single door going into the generator room. From my experience, it seems like it needs for your information, it seems like it needs a knockout panel or some kind of panel on the riverside in the event the generator goes bad You have to pull it out and put another one in.
Andy, that's contemplated. Maybe Bob Neely can comment on that, or you can.
Yeah, I'm going to find that plan. So this plan here shows where our generator.
Up at the top left-hand corner.
Here. Yeah. Yeah, I think Bob Neely should probably jump in and talk about that. I believe that it shouldn't be that big of a deal to have a knockout panel there to replace it if we need to. But Bob, was that the plan?
Yeah, most time we put louvers in. If it's not a heated area, we put louvers in, and that would take place of the knockout panel.
Yeah,
Bob Neely, are you on?
Well, we can respond to that. I mean, I think the commissioner's right. We're going to have an acceptable solution to that, but I think that's something that we would be open to, making sure that works, obviously. And I'm sure we'll have some additional building department comments when we submit.
Sure.
So
I apologize. This is Bob Neely. Can you hear me?
Yes, I need to swear you in. If you could state your name and promise to tell the truth in these proceedings.
Yes, sir. This is Bob Neely, and I'm with LJC, the architect for the project.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. So we have the generator, and you're right. It's in the northwest corner, and our intention is to be able to provide that access. So we were exploring having double doors, and then to address the maintenance moving forward. As we develop it from today.
Thank you.
I do have some broad comments, but I'm going to wait until we've asked the applicants of any questions we have as commissioners before we move on to any public comments. So are there any other questions that we have for the applicants about this new design before we move on to public comment?
So if I remember correctly, I believe you had to go get a BOZA approval for density and maybe parking variance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So has the density changed or the parking?
No, sir. Still 679 beds and 405 parking spots.
Okay. Did we grant, Lucinda or Amy, did we grant a certificate of site plan approval back in January? Do you know?
We did, yes.
So if the building is moved significantly off the property line, I'm not sure that site plan approval is good anymore or valid.
Yeah, the site plan approval issues, I did talk with Jonathan Chambers about this, and all the items that that were looked at are still fall within the site plan approval. In other words, the building height is the same, the actual number of beds is the same, the number of parking spaces is the same. So the design part of it is really, everything that changed is really more of a DRC concern.
Okay, I just want to make sure our previous
good question.
approval
Good question.
is still. And then I guess I would question the reduction in the ground floor openings is what I'm seeing, and the necessity for that.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think it's 5.3.3 proportion of openings. I believe you provided calculations and significantly reducing. I'm just trying to get my arms around where these reductions are, I guess.
I think the biggest reduction is on the ground floor on assembly.
Okay.
And I think
guess that's where you had the trash pickup before. Is that right?
No, we moved that before you guys gave approval, so that's been moved, and that was moved. But I think the difference is we have a window panel in the elevator and we had it because the elevator was turned differently than it is now, but we can still insert, you know, a spandrel panel in that elevator to create more glass. And I think if we do that, we're going to get back pretty close to where we were.
But I think if you look at the, and I'd like to reserve this for after the public input if there is any, but I think when you look at the comparison of the approved scheme and the current scheme, Sanford, you'll also see some pretty, just as an overall, there's a pretty significant difference.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there are just other questions about clarification of the design for the applicant, if there are, please ask. Otherwise, I'd like to move on and see if we have public comment before we come back to discuss the application. Sounds like there are not. And so let's move on to public comment.
Okay, give me a minute while they're going to have to unshare, and then
Okay.
I'll go back to the little our slides that walk that through that. Let's see. Are you seeing this?
Yep.
Paul? Okay.
Good. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails to cocboard@columbiasc.gov or on the web at publicinput.com, COC-DDRC-November. For those wanting to leave a voice message or speak live, call 855-925-2801. And when prompted, press 5138, then *2 if you'd like to leave a message, or *3 if you'd like to speak live. And please turn off your computer audio. And we will begin to hear comments that have been received in writing, if there are any.
We do not have any emails regarding this project.
Any voicemails or anybody calling in live?
I do not have any voicemails, and I do not have anyone who has raised their hands.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we can move beyond that in that case. And so is it possible to go back to the application?
Yes, let me let them share again. Andrew, can you get back on your presentation?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So this does not look like tweaks to me. This looks like a very significantly different design than the previous one. And it's really sort of a matter of incremental changes that add up to a very big difference in effect. You know, I think this is a very, very, very big building. And the introduction of the stucco is a big deal. And it's not something that we, you know, just wholesale can disapprove. It's a acceptable material for the DDRC, but to my mind, what was working by the time we got to March, and we went through quite a bit to get to that point, obviously with a work session and so forth. There was a lot of restraint in the project, but I think that the fact that it was masonry, where you now are showing stucco, was a significant difference. So there were there was less glass than is recommended in the guidelines, but there was enough integrity to the materials and the simplicity of the design and the articulation of the design that I think that we found it in the aggregate was acceptable and was a pretty strong design. You know, my concern now is that we see several things going on. One is we didn't have a problem with the Washington Street facade, and I don't think that the new whatever you call that piece out front is is an improvement to the design. I don't think that it's a deal breaker for a design that comes to the DDRC, but I don't think it's an improvement to the design. But more importantly is that the glazing openings are even smaller now. And because you've pulled back the legs of the U shape or the C shape, whatever you want to call them, they moved north. The internal elevations are much more prominent. It's like sort of lifting up the tablecloth on the table, and it's just, you see it much more prominently. So it's much more impactful, and I think that the overall impact is quite significant compared to the previous scheme, and it's particularly obvious when you go to the side-by-side comparisons. I think it's the last of the perspective slides on, well, this shows it, but, and this shows it. And when you go to the Washington Street, the side-by-sides of those two, I think you have one where it pulls back some, right? Yeah, and there's a whole host of differences that I think are impactful. For instance, in this case, what we had before was a generous amount of corner glass on the southeast and southwest corners that really created a hierarchy that differentiated the composition from the rest of the design, and made a statement about these being important corners, particularly at the corner of Washington and Assembly. And you can see from these renderings that when you turned in on the legs of on the two legs, turned in with the masonry, it went significantly further back, and made the stucco, the white stucco in the courtyard, within the courtyard, much less significant than it is now. So, my concern is it's become incrementally a very different design. And I don't know how other commissioners feel, but I'm far less inclined to accept the significant reduction in glass from the guidelines. It's even more reduced from where it was previously, with the introduction of the stucco, with the introduction of this piece that stands out in front of it on Washington Street, with pushing the legs back so that the stucco on the interior is even more exposed, and the openings, the window fenestration pattern on the stucco has gotten less generous with the glazing. I just, I think overall, this is sort of, I'd almost say starting over, not quite starting over, but this is as different from the other 4 or 5 designs that we've seen since 2015. And I think, if previous design was approved, this is different. And I think certainly in terms of handling and the hierarchy of the composition, that needs to be, I don't think is, in my mind, not something that is a staff approval kind of revision to this proposed design this evening. It's gone, we now have, whereas the guidelines recommend 70% glazing in the ground and 40% glazing above, we're now down on Assembly Street to 34 instead of 70% of the ground, and 27 instead of 40% above. And it's a little better on Washington Street because you don't have the elevator bank. But I think this is a different design from the one that was presented in March. I don't think it's an improved design. I think generally it's less gracious. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that. I'd like to.
I'll say, Commissioner, I believe, or Tom, I will echo pretty much your opinion, and that when I first saw this, I was a little taken back, and as to how it got here and why the changes we're seeing, as you mentioned, do add up to a significant design change. I thought January, I believe, saw the last design. I think we had a subcommittee meeting in March, and I thought we were headed in the right direction. And what I see is completely different. And I just, again, I was a little shocked when I looked at this. So I'm not sure. Again, with what Tom said, what was, the previous design was approved. So I'm not sure how we got back to. I don't want to say taking a step back, but I'm not really wanting to go through another subcommittee meeting to review this design again. I mean, I feel like it's a whole different building in a sense.
Well, I think it is different, and I mean this is another I think pretty striking illustration of the difference if you look at these two facades. One is a much more successful composition, and you've got the masonry all the way up compared to the one on the right. And the incrementalism makes a big difference in the aggregate, in my opinion.
So this is Taylor Wolf. I'm new to the DDRC. I haven't been. I wasn't involved in the committee level approval for the first building that's shown here on the left in the screen that's pulled up. But I beg to differ a little bit, guys. I mean, I don't see. I mean, there are certain elements that have changed. I don't see them as necessarily significant. I think the overall schematics of the project are attractive, fit in with the downtown high-rise community, and so I mean, I think we can kind of maybe work around what is shown in this new redesign a bit more than saying that we're certainly starting over.
Well, the question is whether we approve it tonight or whether there needs to be more work done. I think that I don't think that we can, if the applicant is proposing stucco around the entire building from the fourth floor up, that's their prerogative if that's what they want to do. But I think that there needs to be more consideration of the glazing, which doesn't really even come close to meeting the guidelines. I would at least say that.
That's correct. I would agree with that, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think the glazing.
I mean, I don't know why it was reduced in this design. I mean, after that kind of, I mean, that again, I don't think it's the new design is not necessarily, I'm not making a motion one way or the other. I'm just saying that it's a different consideration from what we approved, and I'm hesitant to, to lean one way or the other. I just trying to figure out how we got here. What was wrong with the original approval and why the changes were made.
I think that the applicants have pretty well explained what the differences are and why they've made the changes. I think it's up to us to decide if it's fine as it is, if there are changes that we want to see that we are comfortable to be made at the staff level, or if the changes that we would want in order to feel as if it adequately met the design guidelines are enough that we would need to see it come back before the commission.
Can we look at some?
We don't hold the pen, we don't design it, but my inclination is to ask the applicant to go back and look at the proportion and a percentage of glazing and come much closer to design guidelines than they are right now. There's a lot of detail that has fallen by the wayside to stucco. Again, it's the applicant's prerogative, but I think that the more consideration, if that's where the design is going, more consideration needs to be given to increasing the glazing. I would say that in these re-entrant pieces on the courtyard, as you can see on the left, they go quite a ways back in before you get to the white stucco. Here, it's almost much more of a veneer. That's a concern, and I think these things are pretty significant.
Do I get an opportunity to respond or no?
Yeah, this is really a time where I'd like to hear from the commissioners, but if other commissioners have input they'd like to give, it might actually be more in your interest to see what other commissioners have to say.
Can we see a couple of more elevations from another angle? Okay.
So it's the ground floor.
Okay. So the windows to me in general look significantly smaller along this elevation. Is that correct? Or are they, especially in the middle section? See a lot more stucco, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, I'd be interested to hear from other commissioners your thoughts. I've appreciated your comments, Taylor. How do others feel? Because I've talked a lot about this, and I'm sure others may have different opinions or similar, or others.
I mean,
I'll speak up. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Andrew.
Or Angie.
No, go ahead, Andrew. Thanks.
Well, everybody who's given their comments so far does have a background in real estate or development. I do not. So Taylor's comments certainly ring a little true, although I will say, just as a kind of a lay person in this area, the design has already been approved. It is a little more appealing to the eye. Just my personal opinion. Sanford makes a good point that there is a lot more, and I guess glazing refers to the amount of glass that's used in the structure, and more of the modern buildings or newer buildings that are being constructed in downtown Columbia do seem to take advantage of the increased level of glass, which is appealing. And along with Taylor not being involved in the discussions that took place back in January, it does seem that a significant amount of the glazing has been reduced.
And I would agree with that as well. I think the previous design that was approved is more in keeping with the guidelines. It is more visually appealing. And in addition to that, I think the reduction of I think you said that the each floor height is going from 10 feet down to 9.4. That just kind of is a negative in my book.
It creates different challenges. I mean, there are certainly some mountable challenges, but I'm not sure that it's been as successfully addressed as it could be with this scheme. I mean, from the staff review, my understanding is that that the glazing just to talk about the Assembly Street side, which is the primary facade, that the glazing has gone from 52% to 34% roughly at the street, but then from 42% to 27% above. And the guidelines call for 70 and 40 respectively. So that's a very, very big difference. And I think, if we're introducing this much stucco all around the building, we're making all of these other concessions. We're decreasing the depth of the courtyard so that the internal facade on that courtyard is far more prominent than it was. I think that we have an obligation to push back on this application some with respect at least to the glazing.
Tom, I'll speak up again. Maybe one thing before we kick it back over to the developer. Maybe there's a compromise to be struck here. If I don't necessarily, you know, my late comments earlier with regard to the reduced glazing, don't really hold true for the setback. You know, the setback doesn't seem to be as offensive to my eye as the reduction in glass. So maybe there's a compromise to be struck in that the setback can remain with kind of a reversion to the percentage of glazing that was approved in the, well, I don't know if it was the initial design, but the previous design.
And by setback, you're talking about along Washington Street?
Yes, along Washington Street.
I mean, that's a design device that's a perfectly legitimate design idea. It's done all the time. We never had any concern about it in March, so it's a little surprising to see that this is very different, but it's not in and of itself innately something that I don't think any of us would find it unacceptable. So I guess at this point, Jay, if you'd like to respond, I think we need to continue to move forward as a commission, but you had asked to respond.
Yeah, I would make a couple of comments. You know, there are some things that we can, you know, talk about and some things that we really can't. The shape of the building is pretty much baked. You know, this is the cost-effective, you know, shape in terms of its, you know, you call it the setback, but I call it the garage formation. That's pretty much has to be. If you were to say that for some reason that's unacceptable, we probably can't go forward. With respect to the glazing, which seems to be the other sort of major sticking point, I mean, I think we should talk about that a little bit. You know, the standard's 40%. We're at 46% on the Washington side, and we're lower than that on the assembly side. You know, we'd be willing to talk about that. I mean, you know, within reason. I don't know that it's fair to hold us to a standard that's significantly higher than 40%. That's what most of your buildings are. You know, we've studied, you know, the other student deals. They're mostly 40%. I think the one that you just had up on the board is more or less 40%. So I think that we're willing to make some changes to try to, you know, deal with the glazing, because you know, I want to view this as constructive, and we're listening. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is timing. You know, I mentioned that in the introduction to all of this. I don't know when the next meeting would come up for approval. I mean, if it's relatively short period of time, that I think works for us. If it gets into the new year, I think that's a problem for us to you know, be able to deliver. You know, we've got other things in the backdrop here, obviously, aside from just the design approval. There's a lot of other moving pieces here. So that's kind of my thought. I mean, I think we can do better at the ground level glazing on assembly, probably not significantly better on Washington, but I don't know that there would be a good place to put more glazing on Washington, quite honestly, the way the street slopes and so forth. I think that the top part of Washington at 46% is pretty good, to be honest, relative to what else is in the marketplace.
Yeah, I don't think we have any issue with, I mean, that's the one place where you're pretty good.
Right. The assembly side seems to be, you know, a concern, and I think we can talk about that. And if you remember at the very beginning of this, I suggested that we would be willing to work with that. And I think if we added some glazing in that stair tower area, or that elevator shaft, or whatever you want to call it, that I think you get a long way towards the numbers that you're looking for. But we can look at that a little bit, and I'm willing to do that. I would prefer, frankly, if you were to push that to a staff decision, you know, set a guideline that's, call it, you know, something closer to what you're requiring generally, and we, you know, make that a staff decision. But if not, it needs to be a relatively quick decision, because the world the way it is today, we're constrained. We're not operating in a place. You know, there've been a couple of comments about why were there changes. This is a very different dynamic than it was in March when we sat before you. You know, I was in person in that meeting. You know, today you haven't probably had an in-person meeting since March. It's a different world, and that brings with it lots of consequences. So that's kind of my view.
Well, our next meeting is December. So that's when it would be. And I think you know, we've worked with you very hard in the past. We've been willing to do work sessions, which we can do again. I mean, I'm an architect and have several projects going on, and I know very well the impact of code, what is impacted and what isn't impacted. I think that there are changes that are going to be difficult to put on staff. I think need to be looked at by the commissioners. I thought that, just for instance, looking at these two elevations, that the giving the glazing at the corner of Assembly and Washington Street, for instance, the larger expanse of glazing, and treating the north corner in a different way on the approved design was much stronger than creating a lack of hierarchy, which you have in what you call in the refinement, where you've got the glazed corners are all kind of the same. You know, sort of putting your eggs in a more visible basket, I think was a stronger design on the approved design. And again, I think I mentioned briefly that when you push the legs back, you've got a very small amount of the color that is being rendered to look like brick. Before you turn the corner, it all becomes white again. So, you know, maybe that goes all the way back to that south facade on either side. So it's not just such a tiny portion that turns the corner. But considerations like that, I think, would improve the design. You know, I appreciate that everybody has to work on a schedule, but we're seeing this however many months it's been since the approval in March for the first time. We assumed that the design worked that we approved in March. So, I mean, we can work. And again, I don't know what kind of motion is going to be made. I'm not going to make the motion. I'm going to leave it up to another commissioner, and you know, we're on the different votes. But we'll work with you. But you know, if these are not just decisions that the commission's comfortable with staff, then that means that it comes back in December. That's the first time.
Well, what I think we ought to go ahead.
And maybe Rachel, or I don't know if Jonathan's on. I mean, I see some site plan changes too. That I mean, we're not original. I mean, the curb cut is larger to the garage entry. The building's moved, and you know, I'd like the staff to, I guess, confirm that you know the original site plan approval is still valid. And I mean, to me, I think you should apply for another site plan approval as well. But I'd like to hear what staff has to say on that.
Sanford, this is Lucinda. I can certainly double check with Jonathan, but like I said, he kind of manages the site plan review process, and I did send him the revised design package, and he looked at it and confirmed that the changes that have been made from those items are things that would be typically, you know, done at staff level after an overall site plan review. So the design changes were significant, but the site plan items were more staff level changes. But I'll be happy
the biggest one for me
to double check with him again.
Is the width of the entry. And you know, it's just different, I think, in keeping with the rest of the building. So, but I'll you know, certainly listen to your opinion, and Jonathan, you know, take him at his word.
I mean, I think that's a valid design concern. Also, I mean, I think that affects both the design and the site plan, but I'm told that the site plan review is still sound.
Okay.
So I just want to make one comment. This is Jay. I think that there is enough concern that we ought to have a work session on this design, so long as we can get on the December agenda. But I want to be candid, because that's just the way I am. You know, I'm willing to look at the glazing. I think some of your commentary there is legitimate. I thought that when Lucinda raised it the first time. But if we're looking to like redesign the entire building, then I'm not going to be in a position to do that. There's too much at stake in what we've got designed here. So I just want to be upfront with you about that. You know, I think that the glazing is a fair issue to discuss, and I think we can accommodate. But if we're going to revisit the entire design, I just don't think I'm going to be in a position to do that.
I don't think anybody's suggesting that.
Okay. But I'd like.
We're seeing a very new design for the first time and we're responding to it.
Right, I think based on Jay's comments and such, you just need to come back to the December 10th meeting with a refinement of the refinement based upon what you've heard.
Well, and I'd like to have a work session to do that, because I don't want it to go a third round that I just don't have time for. So if we could schedule a work session and work our way through that, we'll obviously generate some drawings for that discussion, but I'd like to have that as part of it.
We've offered it before and have done it before, at least I think twice with previous designs. No reason that I can't see why we wouldn't do it. And I appreciate your, on a tight schedule, but you need to appreciate that we're seeing something that's very different from what we approved in March, and it's our responsibility to respond to it. So I don't think anybody here is talking about a complete redesign, but I think that there are some valid concerns. And we're willing to work certainly as fluidly as we can. And they all have to be public, so there has to be notification that goes out. So there's some time constraints, but the staff can jump on that, and we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we'll do everything we can from a logistics standpoint, but when you put together you back out of the December meeting, and then when packets go out, and then when drawings are due, I mean, even with the maximum flexibility, advertising and scheduling a work session and getting it in between now and the December meeting with a holiday in the mix. I mean, we've done this many subcommittees, and I'm not sure that we've ever been able to squeeze some. I mean, it might be impossible. I mean, we can get a work session in, but I'm not sure we can get a work session in and a revised set of drawings before the December hearing. I don't know that that's really going to happen. It might have to be January.
Well, I don't know how the logistics work as well as you guys do. I would admit we need to come out of that work session with an understanding that this is something that would generally meet with the board's approval.
Well, we did last time.
We're just not gonna get this done. It just won't happen. I mean, for better or worse, whether we did a bad job of presenting or should have presented sooner or whatever, just, set that aside. There's no ill motive here. I'm just being candid with you. Given all the things that are out there, we've got to get this processed. And I'm respectful that it needs to be processed that's acceptable to you. I'm respectful of that, but I'm just being candid on the other side too.
We did
Mr. Case, we appreciate your.
Last time we had a work session, you were, I'm sorry?
I was going to say, I appreciate Mr. Case and their efforts and development, but we had a work session, I think, and we were headed in the right direction. And I think what we're seeing today is not a result from the work session. So I think
this is a new design.
We certainly would like to have that, but I would like some assurance that what comes out of the work session also is presented at the next meeting.
If I could back up a second, all I was going to say was, I think, Jay, that there's every reason to expect that that would be a successful process, because we've already been through that process once, and I think twice, actually, if we go back to 2016 or whatever it was. But this last process, we went through the work session and it was successful in March. So I don't see any reason why that wouldn't occur again. But I don't think. I think this is a different design from what we've seen before.
Well, I think we should do it, because I think that I don't want to do I'll be candid with you. I don't want to do a project where you guys don't think we're doing something that fits. This is a project we all want to be proud of, and I mean that sincerely. And if we can't meet the standard, then it's not a project we want to do. So I would like, there to be at least general support. I know we're not going to get everybody to say yes, but I'd like at least for there to be a general support. So let's try to set that up and let's see if we can get it done. I mean, that's the challenge, but let's just see if we can get it done.
Well, we'll move as quickly as logistically possible. I'm sure staff will do that. And I'm sure the commissioners, and again, we haven't voted, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But if it comes to that, I'm sure the commissioners are, as they have been in the past with you guys, willing to, move forward cooperatively and I'm sure successfully and quickly as we can.
And Tom, if you guys want to vote yes on it tonight, that's okay too.
Well, and we might. I mean, I'm one voice, is one voice.
Jay, let me ask. So keeping the physical design of the building as is and reverting back to the percentage of glazing in the previous design is a non-starter?
We need to see it. We would need to see it. You're sort of talking like about a performance spec about glazing, and that we would need. It's our responsibility. I think I'd put it that way, to make sure, as with the responsibility of stewardship that we have as a commission, to be sure that we're comfortable with the result. I don't think that's a staff level approval. It's a pretty universal consideration. That's my opinion. Well, I guess to sum it up, what I would propose to see is consideration of glazing that comes closer to meeting the guidelines, particularly along the Assembly Street side. I think that the applicant is correct that the above ground Washington Street percentage of glazing is well within the guidelines, but I think it's a combination of addressing the percentage of glazing, and I would say revisiting some of the organizational strategies from the approved March scheme. I think one specific case is the corner glazing at the southeast and southwest corners is being identified as primary corners by the way that they were glazed differently from the rest of the building. And I would propose that the applicant revisit the way that the darker expression, the expression of the stucco that is more in keeping with the brick, returns into the courtyard, so that there's more of a sense of depth there.
So the applicant, you are open to a work session, a subcommittee meeting at the time to be.
I think everybody is. From what I haven't heard any dissent on that.
Yeah, I said yes. I mean, but I am really pushing to get this done through by the December meeting. I am aggressively pushing for that.
We'll see.
I mean, I would certainly rather see that than not see approval of the project.
If possible, staff will have to coordinate that.
Yeah.
Lucinda explained there's a whole public aspect of this that I'm sure they'll do everything they can do. If that's the way.
I guess that was my point in further, just making sure they understand that, that we don't have control over the scheduling, and the next meeting may or may not be possible. We just don't know.
Well, I don't think that needs to be part of a motion. I think that's just an explanation in our discussion now, but.
No, I'm just asking the applicant if they understand that and are willing to, that is extra time. I've heard them say time is a major consideration for them, and that is not something we can control.
We'll do our best to help.
Andrew, can you unshare your screen for me so that I can get back to the, thank you.
Sure.
Do you all want to, are you ready for the, well, I guess we need to.
think we've gone through the public comment portion.
Okay, sorry, we're ready for the motion.
Unless there are other comments from the commissioners, I think we're ready for a motion.
I just want to say one thing. I just want to say thanks to Jay and Andrew for y'all's time and represent this project. I mean, as a board member of the URC, I want to see what we can do to make you guys make this project work and make it successful. In my opinion, here in the city of Columbia, we ought to be doing whatever we can, rolling out the red carpet for guys like you coming from Chicago, coming from out of market, wanting to invest here significantly. And, you know, if it's changes like that, I think that those are things that we can get over and things that we should be able to work through in a working session. So I just want to see all the DDRC board come together and do whatever we can in as expedited amount of time as possible to help these guys get this done, because I just think this would be tremendous for the city of Columbia and just overall for economic impact here. So.
I see your sentiment, Taylor.
I'll make a motion if it's
I think
ready.
we've all worked very well together in the past, and I'm sure that it will go well. And I share your excitement about this project. I have from the very beginning. So these are just this is part of the process. It's not unusual, but I think it's part of the process. I'm sorry, Sanford, were you wanted?
But I'll make a motion if there are no other comments by commissioners or yourself.
Please do.
All right, I move to defer the applicant's request for a certificate of design approval at 1401 Assembly Street for the approval of new construction to a subcommittee at a date to be coordinated with staff, the applicant, and the commission to specifically address the design changes presented here today.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Then hearing none, could we have a vote, please?
Certainly, Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes.
and Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Andy and Jay. I'm very excited about this project. I'm sure that it'll be an asset to the city, and have every faith that we'll move forward and get through the process successfully. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom, and thank listeners, and thank Lucinda. She does a great job putting these things together. So we look forward to finishing off and getting this done.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
All right, so our next case moving into the historic agenda is going to be the case removed from the consent agenda, which is 1215 Shop Road. This is a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill, and it is a one-story masonry building constructed in 1950 to house a garment manufacturing business, the Citadel Shirt Corporation. So there have been various changes to the building over the years, some significant, some in staff's view, not as significant. And the plans for rehabilitation are to remove some of the secondary additions, rehab the windows, clean and repaint the brick, and basically clean up the site, I guess, too, for office use. So I will just stop with that brief explanation and let Mr. Salibi air what he was worried about on this one.
Sure. And generally speaking, I don't have a problem with what the applicant proposes to do with the property. I just think it's very close to the line of what the restriction provides, and I'm paraphrasing here, but removing of historic component of the building. Or I guess it's, the language is a little more absolute. I think it says it shall not be removed. But I wanted to give the applicant a chance to speak in kind of a way for us to cover our bases, just to make sure that it does fall within those guidelines. So Chair, I'll let you swear in Mr. Garvin so he can You can speak.
Well, I'm sorry, you broke up just enough for me not to really understand the gist of what you were saying. I don't know if that happened with others. If you could
Sorry,
repeat
I'll
that.
get closer to my microphone. No, just that it, in my mind, reading the restrictions comes very close to the prohibition on removing historic components of the building. So I just wanted for us to be able to cover all of our bases to make sure we were approving something, if we do, that complies with the guidelines, and thought it would be fair to give Mr. Garvin a chance to speak on that.
Okay, very good. And is Mr. Garvin here?
He's here. He's waiting to be sworn in.
Okay. Promise to tell the truth in these proceedings.
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for your question, your comments. And I'll give my response, and maybe we can have a dialogue about it. But typically, when we do these historic projects, and obviously we've done a lot of them, we spend a lot of time researching the original use as well as the original construction. And typically, I mean, this building, the first two buildings, which are the barrel truss buildings, were built in 1950 and 1954. And typically you'll see a 20, 30, 40, 50-year time frame where other more insignificant additions are put onto the original structure. This one's a little different because for whatever reasons, economically, with this company that was using the building, they expanded rapidly. So they did a number of additions after the original 1950 and 1954 over the next 6 to 8 years. So when we were researching the period of significance, those additions fell within that. Unfortunately, all of these additions, which are to the rear of the property, are not historically significant from an architectural standpoint. The two original buildings are. They're very simple, elegant, handsome brick structures with the bow trusses. The additions are a different type of construction. In some cases, different brick. The interior is chopped up. It's just not the same. And our desire was to remove those additions to expose the original historic building. So our client was even willing to forego the historic tax credit process in order to remove these one-story additions to expose the original construction. A lot of the windows of the original bow truss buildings are covered up by these one-story additions. And so we want to remove them to allow more daylight into the building, and again, to expose the original architecture. I guess if you look at the National Park Service standards, they have very specific guidelines about removal of structures, and it really defers more to the period of significance and what the building is being used for. With DDRC guidelines, although that is still an issue, there's a little more flexibility related to the actual architectural integrity of the additions. And so that's why we were pursuing Baileyville, is we feel like there's a lot of merit to removing these later additions, even though they were done within a closer time period. And I guess just by way of a precedent and a case study in downtown Columbia, if you're familiar with the city market development that we did, again, those were late 1880s train warehouses. And some point in the 1930s and 1940s, two of the buildings were combined with an addition that basically covered up the historical integrity. That addition was still part of the period of significance, but it completely destroyed the original architectural integrity. So we removed that infill and returned those three buildings to their original historic appearance. And I think this is a very similar project to that. We're just trying to tear down something that is not architecturally significant.
Thank you. That was a great explanation.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant while we still got them?
I have a question. I'm confused. Where is this building located? You said, I'm not sure where it is.
It's 1215 Shop Road.
Oh, okay. I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm not I guess we can go through the public input process. My guess is there won't be anything since this has just been taken off the consent agenda, but I suppose we should go through that process. All right. We encourage those who would like to communicate via email to begin sending letters and emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov or on the web to publicinput.com, cocddrc-November. If you would like to leave a voice message or speak live, call 855-925-2801, code 5138. Press 2 to leave a voice message and press *3 to speak. Turn off your computer audio. Have there been any comments received in writing?
We do not have any emails regarding this project.
Thank you. Any voice messages or anyone waiting to speak live?
No, I do not have any voicemails and no one waiting to speak.
Okay. All right. I think at this point, Mr. Sleevey, would you be interested in making a motion?
I would, yes. I'd like to make a motion that in accordance with section 17-698 of the City of Columbia zoning ordinance, that we grant preliminary certification of approval for design approval for the exterior changes and preliminary certification of the Bailey Bill at 1215 Shop Road with the following conditions: that staff will review and approve the removal of windows deemed not repairable and to approve any proposed replacement windows. That staff will work with the applicant on the details of any new storefront systems. That the project shall meet or exceed the 20% investment threshold requirement for qualified rehabilitation expenses. That all work shall meet the standards for work as outlined in section 17-698. And that all other details, including signage, will be deferred to staff.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Could we have a vote, please?
Certainly, Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins. Mr. Dinkins, are you there? Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
We have quorum and the motion passes.
Thank you.
Very much.
That's a yes for me too. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkins.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Garvin.
Yes, sir.
Next case, please.
So this is 2319 Wayne Street, a request for approval of several changes to a previously approved plan for new construction of a single-family 2-story simplified Queen Anne style home on a vacant lot in the Elmwood Park Planned Unit Development, or PUD. While not a part of the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District, the PUD agreement included a provision that requires that buildings come before the DDRC for review under the guidelines for the district that were created when the PUD was put into place in 2006. The original proposal was approved by the DDRC on the consent agenda at the September 2020 meeting. After the plan was approved, the applicant requested to add an attached garage and make alterations to the window openings on the right elevation. While the applicant has done a good job of minimizing the visibility of the garage doors on the left elevation, the right elevation includes a large expanse of unarticulated wall space. In addition, the applicant is requesting to alter a single window opening into a double opening, which is not consistent with the openings on the remainder of the structure. The portion of the standards for review that most directly addresses this request is openings, size, and placement, which states the following: the rhythm of windows and doors and structures should reflect that of the existing neighborhood. Construct new buildings so that the relationship of width to height of windows and doors and the rhythm of solids, walls to voids, doors and window openings are visually compatible with the historic buildings in the area. Avoid large expanses of blank walls on the front and side elevations visible to the street. On the added garage, which is flush with the right wall of the structure, there are no additional window openings. leaving approximately 18 feet of unarticulated wall. While this is set back towards the rear of the property and a 6-foot wood privacy fence will be added along the property line, the wall of the garage will still be visible from the street due to site conditions. While the change in grade is slight, the rear of the property sits above the street level, making a lack of windows on the garage visible from the public right-of-way. Due to the visibility, staff is recommending that 2 windows be added to the garage to match the smaller double-hung windows on the right elevation. And that's represented here on your screen now. In addition, the applicant is requesting to alter the window on the first floor closest to the garage into a paired window. Again, that's noted on this slide and on sheet A2 of the plans. As there are no other paired windows on the structure that will be visible from the public right-of-way, staff is recommending that this window remain a single window so that this opening remains consistent with those on the rest of the structure. As such, the staff recommendation is as follows. Staff finds that the proposed changes to new construction at 2319 Wayne Street are generally compliant with the pertinent guidelines from the standards for review in DP districts that were utilized for review of projects within the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District at the time of the PUD's creation. And staff recommends granting a certificate of design approval with the following conditions. 1, 2 double hung windows to match the size, the smaller size on the side of the right elevation be added to the attached garage. The other windows on the right elevation remain as originally proposed, and all other details be deferred to staff.
Thank you. Is the applicant here? Do they wish to speak?
I do not see the applicant on the call at the moment.
Okay. Are we pretty sure about that? I guess, okay. Let's, in that case, let's move to any public comment. Encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails. Emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiase.gov, on the web at publicinput.com, /COC-DDRC-November. If you would like to call 855-925-2801. When prompted, leave the code 5138. If you would like to leave a voice message, press *2, or if you'd like to speak, press *3 and turn off your computer audio. Do we have any written comments?
We do not have any email at the moment.
Are there any voice messages or anybody calling in live?
I do not have any voicemails, nor do I have any comments.
Okay.
Or live callers.
And Megan, we still don't have the applicant, as far as you can tell?
As far as I can tell, no.
Okay.
I'm gonna try and get in touch with him. Just give me one moment.
Okay.
Just reached out to the applicant. So if y'all have anything you'd like to discuss, about the proposed changes, I think, while we see if we can get in touch with him, this might be a good time to have those discussions.
Megan, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why you showing a double window on one elevation as you suggested? I'm a little confused on that.
So why is it? Why am I recommending that it remain a single window?
Well, the first elevation you said you'd like to make it a double window.
The applicant would.
Yes, that was a note from the applicant. That's correct. So the staff recommendation is that it remain as currently drawn and that a second window not be added to that location.
Okay, thank you.
Do you think that the applicant's coming on, or should we move forward, or?
I have not heard anything back from them.
Okay.
I will defer that to Amy.
I think everybody's anxious to move on unless we think that the applicant's going to come on.
I agree. I agree.
Okay. I honestly don't have a strong feeling about this one. Is there another commissioner who would like to comment on this or make a motion about this? But I'm gonna pick on Ms. Fuller-Wilt.
I knew you were going to do that. I just closed my computer, so I can't read directly. Can you just give me the address again, please?
Sure, it's
I can do it.
Street.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sanford. Oh, I didn't hear the address.
If you want me to, I can do it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't think I'm going to get my computer up that fast.
Okay. Got you.
Okay. I will make a motion to grant. I'm getting some feedback. A certificate of design approval at 2319 Wayne Street with the following conditions: 2 double hung windows to match the size smaller side on the right elevation be added to the garage. The other windows on the right elevation remain as originally proposed, and all other details deferred to staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Could we have a vote, please?
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Jaco?
Yes.
Mr. Salibi?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Next case, please.
All right, this is a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill at 511 to 537 Saluda Avenue within the Wales Garden Architectural Conservation District. This group of apartment buildings were completed in 1949, and they were built as advertised for World War II veterans, and they still function today as multifamily housing within the Wales Garden neighborhood. So to give a little background about the history of Wales Garden, it's generally an architecturally eclectic neighborhood. Development in the neighborhood started around 1915 when the first lots in the neighborhood were being sold. And early on, the developers had an idea for the neighborhood that was really, for exclusivity. They had covenants and restrictions in the deeds for the early lots that were sold. These included restrictions against apartment buildings, against stores, against hotels, as well as restrictions against one-story houses and houses costing less than $7,500. So you can see this a lot with some of the original buildings built in the neighborhood around 1915 to 1920. They're kind of grander, higher style, houses typically along Saluda and the earlier built parts of Edisto and to the the western part of the neighborhood along Wateree. But you can see in the development of the neighborhood, those early restrictions kind of quickly fell away to allow for more inclusivity in the neighborhood. You can see this with the smaller bungalows that start cropping up along Waccamaw and Enoree, one-story bungalows, which obviously would not be allowed within this neighborhood, as well as apartment buildings cropping up and options for multifamily housing in the neighborhood. And the multifamily housing, I'll show you some diagrams later, but the multifamily housing was really located kind of on the edges of the neighborhood. These were on the west part of Enoree, close to Pickens. These were almost everything north of Wheat Street, with the exception of Congaree, was historically and is still today multifamily housing. And then along parts of Waccamaw, which is more of the eastern edge of the neighborhood, you'll see those apartment buildings cropping up all around the neighborhood at that time. But by the mid 1950s, even maybe the early 1950s, the neighborhood was really, really developed. And you, Lucinda, if you can proceed through the slides a little bit, you can see that really in the Handborn maps. And we'll talk about the specific buildings in a minute. Yeah, sorry, I should have put these in a different order. Yeah, here's the 1950s Handborn map. You can see above Wheat Street at that time. It's kind of hard to read, but almost everything up there on Santee, Saluda, and Waccamaw is multifamily. They have multiple addresses for each of those buildings because they were covering multiple parts of the apartment. And if you keep going to the next slide, you can see even in the kind of main part of the neighborhood, there's still a lot of development that hasn't happened. There's still a lot of lots that haven't been developed. And then once you get into 1956, there's really not much more land to be developed in the neighborhood. So it's pretty well developed at that point. And that's with a mix of housing types, like I said, you know, the original grand houses moving on to the smaller bungalows, and then also the multifamily that's kind of cropped in on the edges. Just one more slide down, just to show one more example of that. That is where the multifamily housing exists today, and that's where it was historically. In green is the older buildings, including the one we're looking at today up above Wheat Street, as well as the ones in red that have kind of infilled after 1950. So after what you're seeing in the Handborn maps. And listen, if you can go back to images of the building we're talking about. Thank you so much. So these apartments we're talking about today were originally named Saluda Apartments. There's 28 units spread between 7 two-story buildings, and they're really very architecturally, historically intact. There have been very little changes to if any, changes to the exterior of these buildings. And so these are really a distinctly modern addition to the Wales Garden neighborhood. But they're not only reflective, and they do contribute to the understanding of the historic development of Wales Garden, which, as I mentioned, went from a very exclusive, grand style houses to being more inclusive. But these buildings also really tie the neighborhood development into what was going on in the city as a whole. Ties it into citywide trends for post-war housing that were coming into these well-established neighborhoods. A lot of the multifamily projects going on at this time, and again, this is the 1930s, but mainly the mid to late 1940s, when these came in, were administered with assistance from the Federal Housing Administration. They encouraged placing these multifamily housing apartments in established neighborhoods. They wanted people to have desire to live in them. They were wanting them to have longevity and be appealing to the young, modern professional, young couples. They encouraged them being placed within these good, desirable neighborhoods like Wales Garden. They also encouraged simple, direct designs and avoiding over ornamentation, which is why you see, like with this building and with other buildings being built at the time, a very simple, unadorned, kind of modern aesthetic, a modern use of materials, modern building mass and scale. Other buildings being built at this time include Cornell Arms on Pendleton Street, Wales Garden Apartments on Pickens, Claire Tower on Marion, Hall Court, which is in Old Shandon, and Christine Apartments, which is on Millwood near Melrose Heights. So really within well-established and desirable neighborhoods, even at the time and still today, Melrose Heights, University, Wales Garden, in those areas that people want to live. These buildings were also architect designed. This particular Saluda Apartments were designed by Thomas Harmon. His firm designed the State Archives on Senate Street, as well as University's Capstone House and Cliffs Apartments. And so these buildings are architect designed. They're being built deliberately in this modern aesthetic, not just because of the FHA recommendations, but because these are architects working in their time. They want to be relevant in their time. They have a certain aesthetic that they use, and it is the modern aesthetic in this case. So as stated before, these buildings do contribute to the understanding of the historic development of the Wales Garden neighborhood, which shifted in the late 1930s and 40s to more diversity in housing types, as well as tying the larger development of the neighborhood into the larger development of the city as a whole, and trends going on that really, at this time, the city as a whole was embracing the modern aesthetic. So as a contributing building to the Wales Garden District, the applicant is applying for the Bailey Bill. Scope of work on this project is really maintenance and repair on the exterior. There's no exterior changes that they are proposing, with the exception of removing window units, which isn't technically an exterior change. So they will be doing central heating and air and interior renovations to clean up the apartments and make them habitable again. So staff finds that the project at 511 to 537 Saluda Avenue complies with section 17698 of the city ordinance and recommends granting preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill with the following conditions: that the project meets or exceeds 20% investment threshold as a requirement for qualified rehabilitation expenses. All work should meet the standards for work as outlined in 17-698, and that all other details be deferred to staff. And I know the applicant is here to speak, and we may have a few other people who want to speak, but if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions for Rachel before we move on to the applicant? Okay, if the applicant's ready to speak, please state your name. I'll swear you in.
Hi, yes, this is Allison Taylor.
And Ms. Taylor, do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please.
Well, first, I just wanted to thank Rachel for that detailed history. Really appreciate that. And also, thank you for the patience of the staff. We know this has already been deferred once. We think the additional time really helped the staff confirm this project is a classic example of what the Bailey Bill was intended for. The property tax savings will allow us to use funds to renovate and modernize the interior. The property is 70 years old. It's a characteristic fixture of the community and one that's really never undergone any significant renovation. The death of one of the local owners, followed by the pandemic, has really brought on a decline in the condition of the property and the landscape. All that to say, we really believe the neighbors will appreciate the aesthetics of the property with cleaned exterior and fresh landscaping. While there is cleanup and improvements needed, the structural components or the bones of the building are really in excellent condition. As Rachel mentioned, our primary improvements are going to include removing the window units and installing central heating and air, window repairs, exterior cleaning, and interior paint. We do not intend to make changes to the exterior structure. That's to conform with the rules of the Bailey Bill. We believe the existing exterior, once cleaned up and complemented with new landscaping, will be a significant improvement to the current look. We do fully intend to keep open dialogue with the neighborhood. We understand that there are some concerns of a few residents in regards to student housing. We've discussed our plans with a few of the residents and plan to re-engage them once we have a better certainty of matters such as the Bailey Bill. That follow-up will include rendering of the building, which by virtue of the Bailey Bill will show the same structure but cleaned up, and our marketing material geared towards young professionals and young families expecting high-end finishes. We've talked to countless friends that know these buildings and can't wait to see them cleaned up. The buildings need people to make them a home and to bring vibrance and safety back to the property. We envision these residents contributing to the community, frequenting the restaurants and shops in 5 Points, tending to potential community gardens on property. And to attract people, the property needs to be tastefully improved. To improve tastefully, it requires a lot of things like capital, property tax savings, and the sweat of an excited family ready to take on the project. Now I'm about to hand this over to Georgiana Paradises. She is one of the current owners and past residents of the property. The picture that Georgiana painted for us as what it was like to live in the property back in the 80s is really similar to what we want to recreate now. Young professionals and newlyweds excited to invest in and be part of the Wales Garden community. So with that, Georgiana, I'm going to hand it over to you if you'd expand in your own words.
And
All
I
right.
swear you in as well. If you could state your name, please.
Georgiana Paradises.
Thank you. And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
My father and his brothers bought that property in the very early 60s. I was just a very young child, so I vaguely remember. They never used nor intended for young student housing. Over the years, they detested that. They did rent to graduate students, young married couples, and in fact, my husband and I lived there in 1980 to 1982 when he was in law school and I was at Carolina. The lady that lived below us had been there when they bought the building. Her name was Mrs. Collar. She had never married. She worked for the court system there in Columbia. And she'd been there for 30 years. There were several ladies like that that lived in those apartments. If you had the money today, you could not construct those buildings. The floors, even on the second floor, are concrete. The walls are concrete. The steps are concrete. The lighting fixtures outside have been replaced. There were never any major renovations done to the building. Uncle Bill passed in 2016. We have no one in Columbia that can properly oversee and maintain those buildings, and they have continued to deteriorate for the past almost 5 years. They are a wonderful structure with some cleanup on the paint and new landscaping. We would like to see them maintained there. We have been approached by other people wanting to buy that property with the intention of demolishing them and putting high-rise student housing for much better money than this deal is. But we truly would like to see them maintained and taken care of. There are two negatives with that property. The train track on the back, if you're on the phone and a train comes by, it makes a lot of noise. But when we lived there, one of the girls living in the lower apartment was dating an engineer, and he would blow his horn all the way down the trestle. And she would flash her lights if it were night. So there were never a lot of riffraff students and parties going on. Those apartments are not built for that, nor are they suitable for it.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant from commission members? Or questions for staff at this point? Okay, let's move to public comment. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov or on the web at publicinput.com/COC-DDRC-November. If you would like to call 855-925-2801, enter the meeting code 5138. Press *2 to leave a voice message and *3 to speak live. And please turn off your computer audio. At this point, are there any comments that have been received in writing?
Yes, we actually have two separate letters that have been received via email.
All right.
I will read the first one now. This is from Robert Bowers. He says, I am writing as a Wells Garden resident of 25 years in support of Kathy Taylor in her pursuit of the Bailey Bill and her renovation of the Saluda Avenue property. Kathy has a history of well thought out renovations that keep the best of the property's historic character, but updated with modern conveniences. I personally witnessed the quality of her renovation of quadruplex apartments on Waccamaw Avenue in Wells Garden into luxury condominium. She took an eyesore and greatly improved the property. I would hope that our neighborhood would fully back one of our own residents in her efforts to once again enhance our historic neighborhood. This property has been derelict for all of the years I have lived in Wells Garden, and I am happy to see it brought back to life by one of my neighbors.
Thank you.
The other letter we have is from the Wells Garden Neighborhood Association regarding the agenda tonight, item number 4, request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill and Wells Garden Architectural Conservation District. The officers of the Wells Garden Neighborhood Association have voted unanimously to request postponement of the above item until the February 2021 meeting of the Design Development Review Commission. Wells Garden residents have not been provided sufficient and proper notice of the proposed action, which could have a major impact on Saluda Avenue, the gateway boulevard into one of Columbia's most historic neighborhoods. Other factors include that 1, this requested action involved a multi-structure corporate venture in our residential neighborhood, unlike previous Bailey Bill applications within our neighborhood that have been submitted for a single building. 2, the Wells Garden Neighborhood Association has not been consulted at any point during negotiations. 3, the Wells Garden Neighborhood Association asked the applicant to submit a 500 to 800 word synopsis to share with members, but this has not been received. 4, inadequate notice has been provided the Wells Garden Neighborhood Association as November 9th for staff findings and recommendation allows only 2 days to seek professional advice and rebuttal as to the issue of whether these are historic structures. 5, there are concerns that the Saluda Apartments do not necessarily meet qualifying criteria for Bailey Bill advantages. And while they are indeed more than years old, there is room for discussion whether they also demonstrate historic significance by meeting one of 3 criteria: association with historical event, association with the lives of significant people, or architectural importance. 6, action taken by the Design Development Review Commission would result in permanent status for these less than attractive structures that many argue contribute far less aesthetic value to the neighborhood than any development replacing them with owner-occupied single-family homes that should also have the bonus of generating large tax revenues to the city to fund necessary services. 7, growing sentiment within Wells Garden neighborhood is that the student-resident ratio is unbalanced, and continuation of these structures as transient student rentals will not be positive. 8, there is a need for a policy discussion about whether Bailey Bill and other tax advantages should be used to subsidize a continuation or expansion of student rental units in historic residential neighborhoods. 9, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has made communication tenuous, and providing additional time for discussion and transfer of information is necessary for all parties to participate fully so that the best result may be obtained in the best interest of the neighborhood, the city, and the Design Development Review Commission. The Wells Garden Neighborhood Association, by its bylaws, is required to organize and conduct its annual membership dues drive during the month of January. We will use this activity to survey our membership about this project, and thus will be able to report accurate results to the DDRC or the Design Development Review Commission for its deliberations at its February 2021 meeting.
Thank you. I think at this point, before we move on to voice messages and call-ins, because that was a fairly lengthy letter, I would offer the applicant an opportunity to respond if she wishes.
Well, I was actually going to defer and ask Rachel to speak to the classification of it being a historic building. And then I did have some follow-up comments.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, staff's assessment is that it is historic and it does contribute to the neighborhood. I think I mentioned in my presentation, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but you know, it's really indicative of what was going on in the city as a whole. And it's really, I mean, it's a clear part of the evolution of that neighborhood. You know, student housing, I mean, I don't know if it's student housing, but rental housing and multifamily buildings have been part of that neighborhood for 90 years. So it's part of the history of the neighborhood. And I think, you know, too, on a separate level, the building itself is also a very good example of the type of, you know, mid-century aesthetic that was what's going on in the city at the time. And that really ties into the city as a whole. You know, where some other buildings don't always. So that's staff's assessment, is that it is contributing. Was there another question you wanted me to answer?
The other, sure. If you could also speak to the residents being on notice or aware that this was being submitted in the project going forward at this meeting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'd like some clarification on that. I think maybe some other commissioners may want clarification on whether sufficient and public notice was made.
Right. Yeah. The legal requirements for notification that this was going to go to the DDRC have been met. The case was advertised as well as the property being posted. That's part of the reason it was not taken forward last month, was the property was not properly posted. So that has been met this time, as well as members of the public have reached out, and from the neighborhood have reached out starting at the end of September, towards the end of September, and I've answered, and I believe other members of staff have answered any questions that have come up about this property to any members of the public who have asked. And that's starting back in September.
Right.
May I ask a question, Chairman?
Sure.
How were the residents notified? Was it just by the public notice?
Yes, that's.
Or
yeah.
were there direct discussions with the neighborhood association? Have you met in person with them? Or
it sounds like what took place was the legal notifications that are required, but that also you've been in correspondence, Rachel, since sometime toward the end of September with members of the neighborhood. Is that right?
Right. I've had some emails back and forth. Amy's had a couple phone conversations with the neighborhood president as well. So
okay.
They were aware of the project. I'm not sure if there were questions that maybe just weren't answered. I'm not sure.
Okay. So I'd like to get back to Allison, because at this point what we're really doing is offering you an opportunity to respond before we move on to other public input, and then we can have the discussion after we've received the public input. But is there anything else you wanted to say before we move on in response to this last letter?
I do want to move on to public input because I think there's going to be some valuable information there. But I do want to say that, you know, again, we have had dialogue with the residents. They did request that we submit a 500 word write-up on what our plans are. But again, we have to wait to figure out what's going to happen with the Bailey Bill before we really can go into detail about what we're going to do in the interior. We are not asking to do anything to the exterior of the building whatsoever. It really, again, just falls, we feel, very much in line with what the Bailey Bill was intended for. Keeping the exterior structure intact as is. You know, we want to move forward with this project either way. The Bailey Bill will help us do a better job with that. And so, you know, that's why we're here today is trying to just make sure we can focus on that. But again, going forward, once this is approved, we absolutely want to have dialogue with the neighbors. You know, the neighborhood itself is very important to us. My husband grew up in that neighborhood. My mother-in-law lives in that neighborhood. We spend quite a bit of our time there. So, at this point in time, I wouldn't even feel comfortable with my children running around in the yards of that property. We want to make it safe. We want to get people back in there and really improve it.
Okay, so at this point, I think what you're entitled to respond to each individual comment, but with the way that it works in Zoom, it might be better to wait until all of the comments have been pro and con have been made and give you an opportunity to respond at the end of that. If there's a point along the way in between comments where you would like to, let's do it this way. If there's a point along the way where you would like to stop and make a response, you're entitled to. But if I don't hear from you, we'll keep on going through until we get to the end of the public input. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. I'll say at this point, we'll now hear any voice messages received, as well as anybody calling in live.
Sure, I will patch through the first of 2 voice messages. I do have a few callers on the line, but they have not yet indicated they wish to speak. So okay. Here is the first voicemail.
Hi, this is Josh Boltonhouse. I'm a founding principal with the architecture firm, the Design Initiative Group. I've been working with Will Taylor on the renovation to the apartments at between 511 and 537 Saluda Avenue. Just wanted to call in and just kind of voice my support for the project. I think Will has a great vision for the properties. I think they have a historic significance to the community, being some post-war architecture that's not readily found around Columbia. I think it provides a little bit of architectural diversification in the 5 Points area as far as in the era that it was built in. I think they've held up remarkably well over the years, especially for given the lack of maintenance in the buildings over time, but they were built very sturdily, built out of solid concrete and masonry walls, so they've held up really well. I mean, I think that, renovating these apartments and preserving them will present an opportunity to bring them a higher level of clientele than what's there now in the area, and will be people that would help benefit and support the 5 Points area and the surrounding community. Thank you.
And there are other voicemails?
Yes, and here is the next one.
This is record input for regular agenda item, historic item number 4, 511 to 537 Saluda. I am Colonel Michael T. Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N. We reside in the 1917 Tudor House at 505 Saluda Avenue. Been here since leaving the Army and starting the River Alliance in 1994. I'd like this included, so I will do the attestation. I solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I strongly oppose this request for certification and respectfully request the DDRC to disapprove the request. The city approved Wales Garden as a single-family streetcar neighborhood in 1917, which I conclude is a good policy decision. In 1947 or so, the city approved the imposition of multifamily apartments in Wales Garden, which I conclude was a bad policy decision. Your action to disapprove this continuation affirms the 1917 objective and precludes public subsidy of the intrusion of multifamily. Again, the concern here is the public subsidy, a decision by the city to continue multifamily in Wales Garden. I can be reached to discuss this at 803-254-0126, my home phone, or my cell phone, 803-446-1300. Be happy to discuss at any time with City of Columbia staff. Thanks for your attention. Out for now.
Is that the last of the voice messages?
That is the last of the voice messages. I do have a speaker that has raised their hand.
Okay.
And here you go.
Hello?
Hi. Before you speak, I need to have you state your name and then I will swear you in.
Kathy Taylor.
And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I'm Kathy Taylor. I'm a member of the Taylor family that's undertaking the rebirth of the Saluda Avenue Apartments. I'm also a licensed real estate broker, and I manage many properties within the Wells Garden neighborhood. My family's lived in Wells Garden for over 30 years. It's been a wonderful neighborhood, and our family's dedicated a lot of energy over the years to make improvements to less than attractive properties within the borders of Wells Garden. We've revitalized over a dozen residences in Wells Garden with nothing but positive support from our neighbors over the years. We've transformed rundown duplexes into beautiful single-family residences. We've converted old quadruplexes into high-end condos. It's been a labor of pride and love for Wells Garden. Saluda Avenue Apartments will be no exception. On September the 30th, I sent an email to Mr. Frank Adams, president of our neighborhood group, as I learned that he had concerns regarding the Saluda Avenue project. This email asked for those neighbors with questions to please contact me. To this day, none of my neighbors has made an effort to communicate with me. I have received 0 phone calls. I received 0 emails, and that was approximately 45 days ago. So there has been ample time to have discussion. A misconception of the project is that it's geared toward underclass students. The target market for these units will be young professionals and possibly some graduate students. Being a resident of Wells Garden, there is no desire for student rentals that result in large group parties and gatherings, as has been misrepresented. The projected rental rates will reflect a more mature and professional tenant. Without the application of programs such as the Bailey Bill, this property will continue to languish, and with low rental rates and no significant improvements that will enhance the neighborhood and the property values of the neighborhood. While the officers of Wells Garden may desire to judge this property as less than attractive and not aesthetically pleasing, it's a matter of personal taste. Some residents view the property as a historical salvation for World War II veterans returning home from the war. Preserving well-built structures with a history should be the goal for all of us. I fully support this project as a longtime resident of Wells Garden, and I look forward to expeditiously moving forward to make the rebirth of Saluda Avenue Apartments a reality. Thank you for the opportunity. Your consideration is greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else in the queue?
I'm double checking. I don't believe so.
Okay.
And no, we do not.
All right.
We have received another email regarding this project.
Okay.
I believe it's from Mr. Frank Adams, who says that they had 2 days notice of staff recommendations. Prior application was submitted in another name.
Okay, I think we've heard that in the previous letter that was written with reference to the 2 days. I think we've asked some questions about that of staff. Does anybody on the commission have any questions about that? Okay. And we have no internet public comments. We've received all of the public input that we know of so far. In that case, I guess let's continue on. I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor, do you have anything further that you'd like to say in response to anything that's been said?
No, I don't at this time. Thank you.
Okay. A couple of things I would like to address. One is that there was a comment about certification for the Bailey Bill, in this case, the preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. adding a level of protection, historic protection to the property. And that's not true. If another entity came along to buy the property, they could do anything they wanted to do, I should say the Bailey bill wouldn't impede them from, for instance, demolishing the structure. The overlay of the neighborhood is a completely different story, but the Bailey bill would have no impact on that whatsoever. The other is just to make the point that I'm pretty sure that this property is zoned for mid to high density, multifamily, 40-foot high use. So it could be somebody could come along and decide to do several single family homes that would probably create less return on investment than a 40-foot high, high density multifamily, potentially student housing projects. So that's really maybe sort of a sideline and not necessarily relevant to the narrow point that we have to consider this evening. And the third point that I would make with respect to this, and perhaps the most important, is that as an architect myself, as someone who was essentially trained in the beginning of my architectural career at the end of the mid 20th century, I understand this architecture. I've written and spoken and published on, in fact, modern architecture in Columbia. So I understand mid-century post-war architecture very well. And in considering whether a building, a structure is appropriate for certification for the Bailey bill, partially because of my level of knowledge, I know that I'm not an expert. It's our preservation planners. They are our local experts, professional experts on these things. So my habit is always to seek out expertise from experts who have done research. And I think Rachel's done very good research on this. So those are really the only comments I have. And I would like to open it to other commissioners' questions or comments, and then encourage someone to make a motion after we've had this discussion.
Sure. I mean, I would like to commend the Taylors and what they're doing for the property. I think the use is not in our purview, but keeping the buildings, I think, honestly, to me, I think it's the fabric of the neighborhood, and I really appreciate that and the efforts that they're taking are undergoing to make it happen. And as a nearby resident, I do appreciate their efforts.
And speaking to one of the comments made by the neighborhood association about the potential tax revenue from single family housing, I'm sure many of you being involved in the real estate world are aware of Act 388 that passed, I believe, back in 2006, significantly reducing the tax revenue the property tax revenue generated from owner occupied housing, which single family housing would likely be relative to multifamily housing, which is typically lessor or lessee occupied property, which is taxed at a much higher assessment ratio and does not get a lot of credits that owner occupied housing or primary residences get. So there may not be a significant decrease, if a decrease at all, in tax revenue from us granting the Bailey bill, although it does lock in the valuation of the property. It will be taxed at that higher assessment ratio and not receive those credits.
Thank you. Any other comments, and or would somebody like to make a motion?
This is Angie. I have just a couple comments, and many of them are in agreement with what's already been stated, that the DDRC does not evaluate use of the buildings. So that's the first thing. The second is that the number 5 on the parameters that were listed in the neighborhood association's reasons that the structure they believe does not meet the criteria of the Bailey Bill are not parameters that are used. And they are, however, similar to, in addition to the criteria that Rachel provided, that specify that this is a contributing building and it is a contributing historic structure in the neighborhood. And I do agree with those who've said that we think that, I would like to thank the Taylors anyway, for what they're doing to preserve this building. And that's all.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up. I noticed the same thing about the criteria in comment number 5. So thank you. Any other comments? Would anybody like to make a motion? Mr. Dinkins, you're, I think you ruled.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I do have 2 callers on the line that have joined.
Okay.
I believe one is the previous caller, and then there's a new caller.
Okay.
I can patch through the new caller first.
Okay. Hello?
Hi, this is Robin Waite from the executive.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'll need to, if you could please state your name, and I need to swear you in for.
Sure, Robin Waite.
Ah, okay. You promise to tell the truth in these proceedings.
I do.
Okay, please proceed.
This is Robin Waite. I'm the executive director with Historic Columbia, and I'm calling to speak in support of the owner's application for assistance through the Bailey Bill. We certainly have done quite a lot of work of late in mid-century modern architecture in Columbia. And this property was built in 1949 during a spate of post-World War II residential and commercial construction, and represents a distinct and really important chapter in Columbia's mid-century modern architectural evolution. It's a time in which modern design resulted in really dynamic additions to the city, as Tom has mentioned. And this is a great collection of streamlined apartments that speaks not only to a trend in urban development that certainly is worthy of preservation for the role that they play in defining the character of the northern aspects of the Wales Garden neighborhood as it relates to the evolution of what is now our historic 5 Points district, as well as other proximal districts. The retention of these kind of multi-occupant accommodations and steps to preserve their character defining attributes while addressing much needed capital repairs through the Bailey Bill incentives are beneficial and can catalyze further investment in multi-occupant housing that stands nearby. So again, just on behalf of Historic Columbia, we certainly are supportive of the owner's application for assistance through the Bailey Bill and applaud the efforts to maintain the physical integrity of the properties and the diversity of this aspect of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. And we had one other caller?
Yes, it was the prior caller, and I can connect if you so choose.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Are you there?
We're here.
Yeah, I'm Jimmy Knight. Kathy Taylor and I were here together, and I'm getting on her phone.
Excuse me.
I'm a lawyer in Columbia.
Yes. Excuse me. I need to swear you in. I didn't realize that you had not spoken before. You promise to tell the truth in these proceedings? Hello?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't realize you hadn't previously spoken. I need to swear you in, and do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yeah.
You promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Hello?
Yes. Hello? Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you want me to do.
It's a formality. I need to swear you in, so I'm asking, do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yeah, we're having a bad connection here, I think. I'm not hearing you very well. I can call you in on a different phone. But I mean, if you want my name and address, and is that what you're looking for?
No, I think we're fine. Go ahead and proceed, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm Jimmy Knight. I'm a lawyer here in Columbia, and I'm also a 40-year resident of Wales Gardens. I just want to point out a few things. I drive down Saluda just about every day. And for those who are advocating single-family housing, I'd just like to point out that from Blossom to Wheat Street on the same side of the project, there is only one family detached dwelling, and that's at the corner of Wheat and Saluda. So single family housing won't necessarily cause a change in the use of the property. Across the street, it's nothing but single family housing, all of which are rental properties. And that extends further to the south across Wheat Street. As far as multifamily is concerned, the Edisto is my guess, 20 units in there. I've never seen any sort of student problems at that particular location, or the multifamily at the corner of Wheat and Edisto. I've never noticed any problems with student housing there as well, in the event that there were student housing in that location. That's really all I have to say. Everyone else did a good job of taking care of the facts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Do we have any other, before we, I can't remember if we were already in the middle of a motion. Did Sanford make his motion?
Sure. Do you ask me? Okay.
I could not remember if we were in the middle of a motion when we got these other calls, but
I don't think so. I don't think a motion has been made.
okay. Would you like to make a motion?
Sure.
Okay.
I will make a motion to grant a preliminary certification of the Bailey bill at 511 through 537 Saluda Avenue due to the project being in compliance with section 17-698 of the city ordinance with the following conditions. The project shall meet or exceed the 20% investment threshold requirement for qualified rehabilitation expenses. All work meeting the standards for work as outlined in section 17-698 and all other details deferred to staff.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Could we have a vote, please?
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes.
and Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf? Well, the motion passes.
And we had an entire evening of unanimous votes, I believe, maybe for the first time. Is there any other business?
There is no other business.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Anyone opposed?
Yeah.
I think that was a no. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.